Welcome back to another Pow Pow World video. Just a quick reintroduction in case you don't know, but Pow Pow World is my own creature collector concept inspired by monster tamers like Digimon, Yokai Watch, Pokemon, and many others. But with that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Since it's the winter season, it felt like the right time to go over some Pow Pow that would inhabit the icy regions of Leka. Leka is the name of the land that the world is currently set in. As of now, I actually only have one ice type design, that being the legendary Pow Pow Warcom. So we're due in for a few more. Let's get it started with Mawji. So a lot of these designs came from past doodles that I drew that I'm now trying to repurpose to fit into Pow Pow World. I did this doodle board back in July of 2022 and always really liked this little creature I drew to fill in the gaps of this doodle board. And when searching for potential ice type Pow Pow designs, I thought this one could definitely fit the bill since it's a bit spiky, which I associate with the ice type. I really enjoyed its proportions of this huge head on this little tiny froggish body, so I didn't deviate too far. But I did give it these single toe claws just to add another point of sharpness throughout the design. I also gave it this white pattern to better push the ice type, and it worked with this shape to resemble a snowy peak mountain. And the last thing to do was just to finalize the colors. Mawji, the snow jaw Pow Pow. These Pow Pow love to eat powdery snow. The more snow they consume, the bigger they grow. Many people living in icy regions will lead Mawji throughout their towns to de-ice their roads and walkways. Its color variant is a play on a strawberry snow cone, which I think is pretty fun. I think the head shape is quite unique, which helps it stand out. I do have to work out what it would look like in a 3D turnaround, but that's a problem for the future. After doing the legendary Pow Pow designs, it was really nice to get back to doing just super simple, silly designs, because that's where my heart really lies and what I want many of my Pow Pow to be. But this little guy won't stay a little guy. It will evolve into Koji. Looking at Mawji's design, I knew it had to evolve because it was just too simple. I didn't have any immediate ideas because I felt his design really could go anywhere. So I went ahead and perused my collection of doodle boards and found one that would be a good starting point for an evolution. The doodle that inspired this design actually came from a doodle board back from June of 2022, so just about a month before Mawji's doodle. So I took the doodle and began fleshing it out as the design. The reason I chose it was of course its spikes that resembled almost a mountain, which Mawji also kinda has going on. They are also both these very large mouthed creatures that look like they have a very low mobility. Because they do look so similar, this means that this is a relatively simple evolution. Meaning the line doesn't evolve much conceptually as some of my other Pow Pow. It pretty much just gets bigger, which is sometimes a complaint of mine with some Pokemon designs, but in this case I think it works. Since it is this mountainous creature and there's a lot of emphasis on this giant mouth that eats and collects snow. This doodle had a ton of spikes and lines to start with, so it took a bit of time to figure out the line work. At this point the design was looking incredibly awkward. It almost felt too smashed in on the front, so it definitely needed another pass. The head and limbs were all squished together in the front part of the design, which was intentional at first to give the mountainous spikes on the back plenty of breathing room, but it just didn't look right. Eventually I removed the awkward tiny arms and put it on 4 legs like its Prevo. I think this is where I finally started to like the way it looked. From here on out, it was mostly cleanup and working on the snow pattern. The snow pattern was mostly the same from its Prevo, covering the top part of the head and back. I also kept the colors pretty much similar, but did end up changing them a bit just so it doesn't exactly match its pre-evolution. In Pokemon, I like when evolutions and pre-evolutions don't exactly color match. I played a bit with the biggest back spike, trying to see if I could add something to make it more interesting, but everything I added felt a bit too busy, and I decided to leave it blank in the end. But let's introduce Koji, the mountain jaw Pow Pow. Koji are too big and slow to run around, so their tactic of attacking other Pow Pow is to lie buried in the snow until another Pow Pow approaches them. It uses its large jaws to latch onto its foes. Koji is another fun design, relatively simple, but I like it. Has lots of kaiju energy, which I really enjoy, and it kinda almost acts as a rival to Pikagon, which I also think is a fun dynamic to have. But let's move on to our next design. So this design came from a much more recent doodle board, January of 2023, which I guess isn't even that recent since 2023 is officially on its way out. You'll also see that 3 other Pow Pow designs came from this board, those being Star Lion, Sawnape, and Phantom. And there's one more doodle here that will become a Pow Pow, but we'll go over that soon. So this doodle board was specifically drawn with Pow Pow designs in mind. So unlike the last two, this doodle was always meant to be an ice type Pow Pow. And now, many months later, it's finally time to make it into a reality. It was pretty simple, an armadillo, turtle-like creature that had giant icicles sticking out of its back, and could retract its limbs to turn into a ball. When I think of creatures living in the snow, I do tend to think of compact and stocky designs. It's also my personal bias for design, so this one was very up my wheelhouse. But unlike Koji and Mawji, it's much more mobile due to the fact that it could turn into a ball. I like that it has a bit of a gimmick to it, which is what keeps me interested in it. Took a bit of playing with the colors and working the armor pieces and legs to make sure they made some sort of sense. Originally, I was imagining it much more armadillo or pangolin-like, but I think it actually came out much more reptile/turtle-like. I do like that it kind of sits between the two, since I do like when my designs are much more ambiguous creatures. Also, since neither of those creatures typically live in the snow, it's kind of fun to put it in this type of setting. For the colors, it did seem basic to make it blue, but I really think blue does serve its purpose here the best. Again, I keep fiddling with the body and shell since I was really worried about how it made sense. I also wasn't sure how I should go about rendering the icicles on its back, but I like how they came out in the end. I really wanted to keep them simple to mesh well with the rest of the design, and I think it works. But yeah, the design was pretty much set from there. Introducing Snowball, the Ice Puck Pow Pow. These Pow Pow cannot move very fast on their limbs, so they live on steep mountain slopes which they could easily slide down upon by retracting into their shells. If their foe does manage to get close, Snowballs still have their sharp icicles as their final line of defense. I think this is another really fun design and I'm super happy to add it to the roster. It doesn't play into my personal biases, but I think it does look really cool and I could see childhood me really liking it. The color scheme and color variant for this design was heavily inspired by my friend's favorite color palettes, because I have a feeling he's really gonna like this Pow Pow. I also decided to make it steel ice because Warcom is already ice steel and I don't want to be too repetitive off the bat. But also I do think it works out just as good, if not better. But with that, let's move on to the final Pow Pow line for this video. So for this design, the evolution was actually designed first, and then I retroactively decided that it needed a prevo, which is where this design comes in. The goal was pretty much to make an electric looking squirrel with subtle nods to its evolution. It's a pretty basic design with the lightning shaped tail and the patterns on its face, but it serves its purpose and I like the role it fills for this line. So let's introduce Jolter, the small bolt Pow Pow. These Pow Pow live in trees and use their electric abilities to keep themselves warm in cold climates. They avoid confrontation from other Pow Pow, usually scavenging for leftovers or small berries in higher places bigger Pow Pow are unable to reach. I gave it a white color variant to reflect the fact that it primarily lives in the snow, but I can imagine it living in other parts of Leica as well. Now, let's move on to its evolution. As I hinted at earlier, this design actually came about from the same doodle board as Snowball's doodle. It's a very generic saber-tooth tiger creature, but I enjoyed the proportions and saw potential to work it into Pow Pow world. I was really looking to create a Pow Pow that lives in the snow, but is not an ice type like the previous two Pow Pow lines. And when I stumbled upon this doodle, I thought this could work since saber-tooth tigers are kind of associated with the Ice Age. For me, tigers always lend themselves to an electric typing just because the colors and stripes remind me of lightning. So I leaned into that here. It was really tempting to make it an ice type and make its fangs icicles, but we already had our creature with icicle design, and I needed some non-ice types to populate the frosty areas of the region. My original sketch was really basic, so I knew more colors and patterns would be needed to better break up the negative space. I also wanted to keep the stripe patterns to a minimum for maximum impact, but also for simplicity, and to not overcomplicate the design. I had his limb be patterned in black, and I really like how I added weight and heft to the design there. They also kind of look like gloves, which is typical in electrical work. I toiled a long time with the top hair part as I was unsure how to handle it. It's really hard to make things make sense sometimes, but I think I made it work in the end. Time to meet Tasertooth, the Pouncing Thunder Pow Pow. Jolter who are forced to compete for resources will sometimes evolve into Tasertooth. With their powerful bodies, they are able to challenge a larger variety of foes for territory and food. I love the color variant I gave to this Pow Pow, probably one of my favorites so far. Was really debating on it being the main colorway, but yellow just made it more sense thematically. Overall, I really enjoyed this line as a whole. The idea of a squirrel turning into a saber-tooth is a bit odd, but fun. The large buck tooth of a squirrel transitioning into giant fangs of a saber-tooth I think totally works. I also did my best to bridge the gap by giving the first stage hints of tiger features like the head shape and the lightning pattern that could be read as stripes or whiskers. I like how the line also goes from scavenger to predator. It's a line where I think the evolution is so fun that I'm okay that I don't love the designs individually. But these are all the new Pow Pows for this video. I'm quite happy with the Pow Pows, although I feel like they err much more on the simple side this time around. I really am happy I decided to work on a specific environment / habitat because now I can really imagine these Pow Pow inhabiting the world and interacting with one another. I could also see Monsen Line inhabiting the same area as well. But yeah, let me know what you think of all the designs shared today. Good or bad, it's fun to get different opinions. Just be respectful is all I ask. But with that, thanks so much for watching, and I will see ya next time.